Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Shady. I'm director of the Alaska Division of Agriculture, and it's Thursday at noon, so Facebook Live. A couple of things to talk about before we get started with Gina, because I'm really excited to hear about growing plants and getting starts in that. First, for those of you that keep calling in on our microgrant program, we got 2,500 pre-applications. We have a wonderful response. Trouble is it's going to take us a month or so to figure out how we're going to get them inputted and work the program. We're having a few challenges with the federal government and ag marketing services. So what we don't want to do is have an application out there and then be told you have to redo it. So until we get this worked out with USDA, we get the data, we've got to put it on hold. I really feel bad about that. That was not our intent. We worked really hard. I've had 5 staff working on this at times, trying to get it done. And we have 1 grants person. So that tells you we're pulling people from other areas. So look on the website, end of March, we should know where we're at, and then we're going to go forward. The other thing, and John, do you have that little container? Yeah. So John's going to show, I'm going to grab a container here. He's going to walk around the camera. Well, invasives, as you guys know, is a big problem that we're trying to keep out of Alaska. And so yesterday, we were informed that at Petco, they have this, I guess it's a moss called Beta Buddy, Merry-Mo ball. Frankly, don't even know what it is. The trouble, and I know you can't see it, is it has zebra mussels. So we're going to be putting a recall notice out, stop order. We're going to be trying to come around. We're going to have to go out, and anybody that's bought one of these will help you get them eradicated from your fish tank. This is a horrible, horrible problem. I can't stress enough how bad this is. So if you bought one, we're going to be working with Petco. They've already said that they will take them back and take them off the shelves. But what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go and help make sure you've cleaned your fish tank. Zebra mussels is a horrible, horrible problem in the lower 48 and the Big Lakes, and it's something we just cannot allow to get started in Alaska. So I didn't want to really get into too much time with that because Gina's got a great presentation that goes a little more than our half hour. So, but I wanted to tell folks that, you know, we're on this. You'll be watch the news. You're going to probably see my face and a few other people out there saying this is bad. We need to get on this. We are going to come around. We'll do the efforts to make sure this is immediately eradicated. This is a really, really big problem. And so with that, Gina, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and we get to talk about starting plants. So that's wonderful. If you have comments and questions, I think that the easiest way is to put them in the chat box. And then when we get done, Gina and I'll try to work through them, and we'll answer as many as we can. How's that work, Gina?
That sounds great. So my name is Gina Dion, and I am the program assistant at the Anchorage Outreach Center Cooperative Extension Service. And I am a master gardener, and gardening is my passion. And I start my own seeds. I've been doing it for years, and it's such an important thing to know how to get your own garden starts. You can avoid spending tons of money at a nursery. You know you're getting healthy food. You know you're getting the exact variety that you're looking for. And so I'm going to share some of my tips and tricks with you today. Let's go ahead and get started. All right. The best way to start is, of course, picking the right plants. And we're going to go ahead and put in the chat a couple links. So depending on where you're joining us from, you'll be able to find the varieties that have been tested and are found to be successful in your area of Alaska. Because we have long days and a really short, cool growing season, some plants do struggle. Cold weather plants like the cabbage, carrots, they do really great. But things like tomatoes and cucumbers, you're probably going to have some kind of greenhouse or hoop house to produce a crop that you'll be able to harvest in time. I have another class next week actually on season extenders. You can check us out at the Cooperative Extension Anchorage Outreach Center. Those are free classes. I'll be hosting them every other week on the noon hour on Wednesdays. Oop, sorry about that. Don't know why it closed. Oh, because I hit a link. Sorry about that.
That's
All
okay.
right. So let's talk about selecting your seeds. What if you can't find what's on the variety list or you want to try something different? There's a couple things you can do. You can look at your seed packet or in your catalog to look for keywords like frost tolerant, cold hardy, short season varieties. Pretty much, and it really does depend on what part of Alaska you're in, but we're looking at a fairly short, under 100 days growing season, unless you do something to extend that. So you're going to be looking for varieties that take less than 100 days for the most part. There's also a little trick I like to do is know where you're buying your seeds from. If you're buying your seeds from a producer in Florida or Texas, they're going to have much different varieties than somebody in, say, Minnesota or in New England, because they're used to working in cooler northern temperatures. So if you know where your seed source is, you know that they're going to be more successful, or they have more of a chance of being successful in our area. Although there are still some that may not work out. Some plants bolt because of the long days. Some just won't ever reach maturity. But a lot of that fun thing about starting your own plants is you get to choose what you want to try and see if it works. Make it a fun little experiment, and you'll know next year what you can do and what you can't. So I always encourage people to experiment and be creative with your seed starts. So once you're deciding, okay, I'm going to start my own seeds, I want to have my own plants from start, you're going to start with, of course, your packet. Your packet will have very important information on it that tells you how long it takes to germinate, how far you should space them apart. But right now, you don't have to worry about that. The only thing you have to worry about is how deep your seeds need to be planted. And most seed packets will include recommended depth. But you will need to start almost all of your seeds ahead of time indoors in Alaska. We just don't have a long enough growing season to start them in the soil once it warms up enough. To do that, you're going to determine your last frost day, and good gardener rule of thumb, that's pretty much Memorial Day weekend. So the first week of June is, and it has been pushed further back. Last week, I think last year it was sometime in May, but that's a good safe bet. And that's still the bet that I go by. And then use your seed chart to see how long it takes for your plant to get to maturity. And once you know that, you work backwards from that frost date. So if you know it takes 2 months to get to maturity, you're going to want to start that plant instead of in June. You're going to want to start it in April. And I made myself a little cheat sheet because I don't want to have to do the math every year. This is my garden journal, and I basically have all the varieties, the basics of what I plant, how many days it takes to get to maturity, and then I can work backwards. And now I don't have to do the math anymore. I just look at this card and say, oh, okay, I want to start lettuce. That's a 60, or my greens are a 60-day. So I need to start in mid-April to go ahead and have those ready to go out during the correct time and give them a full growing season. You can also use a seed starting calculator, and I'll go ahead and share that link in the chat as well. So you'll have that. It's really handy. You can just put where you are, and it'll tell you when your plants should be, and it will do it by variety. So that's a really neat time saver. So what seedling need is very basic. They need to have containers, and those containers need to be size appropriate. That means you're starting small, and they need to have lots of drainage. You definitely want to make sure, if you're reusing nursery pots or yogurt containers or whatever you happen to be planting in, make sure they're clean and sterilized, because during those initial weeks of growth, that is when your seedlings are going to be the most vulnerable to bacterial infection, damping off, all of the other problems that can happen. So making sure you have clean, sterilized containers and growing media is an important. And one thing I try to reuse and recycle as much as possible. I have a compost pile. The one exception is my growing media for seeds. So your seed start materia could be peat moss. It could be those little pellets. You can use grow sponges. There's lots of different things you could use. The most important thing is those be sterile. So if you have to go out and buy a bag of one thing all year, make it your seed starting material. If you invest in that each year, you're going to have your starts have the best chance of success. It does need to have good drainage as well, but it does need to retain some water moisture in it. So it's probably going to have some peat and some vermiculite, and those grains are going to be really small because you want to give the plant the ability to push through that medium and let those tiny roots push their way out. So you don't want it to be anything heavy. You don't want to use a really clay soil. You don't want to just dig up the soil in your backyard for your seedlings. That's going to be way too heavy for them. You can work with your compost bin and your native soil as soon as those seedlings have had a chance to get a little bit bigger. You're going to need light for the most part. If you live in a really sunny area, even now, we still haven't reached 12-hour days yet. And so the sun is working against you right now. And March is a great time to start some of your seeds, especially the longer season ones. But you can start them in a south-facing window. If you do that, though, you do need to turn them, and I'll talk a little bit about why in a few slides. But I recommend getting supplemental lighting. That can be a fluorescent shop bulb or a shop light. You can get them for pretty inexpensive. You can use LED light strips. You do not have to invest in grow lights, and grow lights can be really expensive. If you want to go that route and you have the money to do so, feel free, but you can get just as much growth from a soft white light and not have to spend as much money, especially up front. And I'll show you in a slide or two my setup. If you're growing warm weather crops like cucumbers or tomatoes or peppers, you're going to need a heat mat because most homes are under 70 degrees at this point. And you probably don't keep your home much higher than that. So those warm weather crops are going to need warmer soil. So the heat mat can be helpful for that rather than cranking your heat up and heating your whole house. And finally, moisture. You're going to want to use either tap water and keep those seedlings moist. If that means putting a humidity dome over them, and I'll show you what one of those looks like in just a moment, you don't want those seedlings to dry out during the first weeks. That is one of the most common reasons why starts fail. But you also don't want to let them sit in water, so it is a balancing act. You will need to check them frequently, not every hour, but you'll need to check them daily and make sure the potting media is still moist enough to sustain that growth. And again, we'll talk about humidity domes in just a moment. Do we have any questions from chat?
Any questions yet, John? Yep.
All right, I'm going to keep going through and
Wait a minute. What's the
How do you sterilize containers?
the people are asking about sterilization of containers for reuse. What are your thoughts?
you can use a 10% bleach solution. You can use soap and water to clean those out really well, and hot water. You don't need to do anything fancy. Just make sure they're washed out as much as possible. And if you've had a problem in those pots before, if you have algae buildup, you may need to go the 10% bleach solution route, but for the most part, you shouldn't need to do that. Soap and water will do the trick.
Excellent.
And I'm missing a bunch of my slides.
That's all for now.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, good. Thanks.
So these are some of the things that I was talking about. Other than the basics, these are things that I like to consider nice to have, but not necessary. So I use a wire baking rack. I actually have one set up downstairs as well. This is a south-facing patio window. I'm not sure if you guys can see my cursor. But these plants, these are tomatoes. They are on a heat mat in a humidity dome. And the humidity dome basically just keeps them from drying out. You can see there's all different size pots. I've got some peats down here, some 6-packs. I even have some flowers starting right over here. So this is an example setup. A fluorescent light can be really simple. I have fluorescent lights mounted on the bottom of these shelves. And you can use a wire shelf that you get at a restaurant supply company, or you go to Costco and grab. So, and I got all of mine on sale at Costco, and I replaced all of my fluorescents with LEDs. And I'll tell you, my plants were really happy with that choice. Some other things you might like to have, but you don't need, are timers for lighting systems. You want your seeds to get about 15 hours of sun a day. And since we're not there yet, you're going to have to monitor when those lights come on and off, or you can get a timer and let the timer do the work for you. So that's definitely a convenience factor. You'll want a small fan for air circulation. This not only helps with pest problems and problems with dampening off and algae buildup on the soil, but it also helps give that plant a little bit of breeze so the stem gets nice and firm and strong. Without that, you might end up with weak, spindly stems. A spray bottle to mist soil is nice. I've never really found it necessary. I like to water my starts from the bottom, which means adding water to the bottom of the container and letting them suck up what they need. But when you're first starting and you just put those seeds in there, a spray bottle can be really nice to just make the top of the soil moist in between full waterings, because at that point, you're not going to have to add very much water at all until they start growing. We talked about humidity domes and heat pads. You're definitely going to want to label your plants. Take the time to invest in doing that, because you might think you'll remember what you planted, but you won't.
Yeah, you won't.
And I've done that enough times that I'm speaking from experience when I say definitely
Yep.
use a nice permanent marker and label your plants so you know what you planted. And then I always recommend, when you do start feeding your plants, you're going to use a liquid fertilizer. There's two reasons why I recommend this. One, you can dilute it. So a half strength liquid fertilizer is good. You don't want them growing so fast they outgrow themselves. And you want them to stay compact and strong. That will help. But also, liquid fertilizers don't have additional salts in them like granular fertilizers do. And those additional salts can be problematic for young plants. Any plant if you have too much. But definitely those younger plants are a little more susceptible to problems. All right. So you've started your plants, you've got them coming up, and you notice problems. And you are going to have problems. I know that you probably don't want to hear me say that, but I'm going to be straight with you, because it's never going to be perfect, even when you've done it as long as I have. Some common issues are leggy plants. If you look at the very bottom, this is what I'm talking about. It's really long and stretched out. That happens when you have either not enough light. So you want to keep your light about 2 to 4 inches above those seedlings when they sprout. You're not going to want to have it way up high, because they're going to stretch out towards that light. So you want to keep your light about 2 to 4 inches above your seeds. And if you're growing in a window, for example, you might notice they're all stretching to one side. That's, again, them trying to reach out towards that light that they need to survive. So you're going to want to turn them daily to make sure that they're getting equal amounts of moving around on each side. Dampening off, you can see right here, is when the entire seedling just kind of rots at the base of the stem and falls over. This is a fungal disease, and it's usually caused by overly wet soil, or if you don't have a fan and you have no airflow, you'll see that build up and your plants will start falling over. That's avoidable. Keep the top of your soil dry. That's why I like to water from underneath, and keep air movement over the soil, and you should have no problems with dampening off. Failure to sprout is usually due to old seeds. If you have brand new seeds and they're not sprouting, it's possible your potting media dried out, or maybe it's just not warm enough for them to sprout. And some seeds, like for example, rosemary, it takes 2 months to germinate. So if you have a seed, make sure you check your packet and see how long you need to wait for it to actually make its first sprout. Not everything is going to sprout in 3 to 4 days. We talked about directional lighting and leaning out. That usually, a lot of times, will come along with legginess. Questions about possible problems? These are the most common problems.
Any other questions on problems?
Some fertilizer questions.
Fertilizer question, okay.
Sure.
One is, what are some examples of non
some examples of non-chemical fertilizers for the vegetables. So I would just say, I'd broaden that to, you got ideas on fertilizer and how to approach it for the beginners?
Absolutely. With seeds, you're not going to have to really, with starts, you're not going to have to worry so much about it, especially if you're starting with new soil. It has all the nutrients it needs. You might need to fertilize after a few weeks, but you're not going to want to fertilize until you start to see signs. And you'll see in an upcoming slide what that looks like. And if you're starting with new seed growing media, you're probably not going to have to amend that soil. So amending soil for vegetables that are going out in the garden, that's a whole other topic that I could spend an entire session on. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks.
So now you've got your seeds, they've started. And if you notice in these, they have these cute little heart-shaped leaves. These are the seed leaves or cotyledons. They are the very first things that come out. They're not considered true leaves. They basically are there to make sure that initial seed has enough energy to produce the roots and the rest of the plant. So they're kind of like the advanced guard. You're going to want to thin them out if they're this close together based on when your seed packet, what your seed packet says. So for example, if your seed packet says you should plant things 2 inches apart, I might pull all 3 of these, and I will tell you, it is heartbreaking to pull plants that you've grown, but it does make it a lot better for the plants that you do keep. So I would pull these out with my fingers, or I might use really pointy, sharp scissors to snip them off at the base. Leave this one. This looks nice and healthy. I'd get rid of these and leave this one, and do that so that I now have 1 plant every however many inches your seed packet recommends. If you are using scissors, make sure they've been cleaned thoroughly. You can do that with soap and water, a 10% bleach solution, an alcohol pad to clean those scissors off to make sure you're not damaging. And that's true whether you're thinning out or whether you're pruning later to get a shape. You do want to transplant them when they're quite small. This is the size I recommend. This is some broccoli up here. You notice they have the 2 true leaf or the 2 seed leaves right down here. This center leaf is what the actual first true leaf looks like. And once they have that first true leaf, it's a good time to transplant them. Their root systems are not that extensive yet, and so you should be able to pull them right out. Never handle a transplant by the stem. If you rip the stem, if you damage the stem, you're done. That plant can no longer grow. But if you rip a part of this leaf off, it'll grow new leaves. So you don't have to worry about that. So I definitely recommend being gentle when you're coaxing it out. Try to get under the root ball, like use a small plastic knife or something to kind of get under there and help you lift it up, and always hold that root ball because it'll be heavy to bring your plants over to the new medium. And then once you transplant and they start getting bigger, these are tomatoes down here, you'll notice they're kind of yellowing. That means now they need new fertilizer. So at this point is the point where you would want to fertilize, not before that. When you're transplanting, I recommend planting deeply, but not too deep. So you're going to want to go basically right to the base of those seed leaves and get everything under that in soil. And that will give you a nice start. The exception to that are plants like tomatoes that can root from their stems, where you want to bury those super deep. But that is the exception, not the rule. And then once you transplant, keep an eye on your plants, make sure that they are doing well. And once they start showing sign that they need fertilizer, you can go ahead and do half diluted fertilizer for that. If you do use too much fertilizer, 2 things can happen. The plants can burn. It's an actual chemical burn that they can get, or they'll start growing so fast they get leggy and it weakens them. So those are my thinning, transplanting, and handling tips and tricks. Any questions? I know I'm going really fast. I want to make sure that I try to honor your guys' time and not go over too much.
Yeah, and it's great. And we will have this recording put up so people can go back and they can watch it over again. So
Oh,
this is
excellent.
very, very helpful. So yeah, usually by the end of the day, John's got these posted. So all of our Facebook lives, you're going to be a star from now on.
Excellent. So the last part, and this is the funnest part, but it's also the part where we see most of the failures, is hardening off. So when you started your plants, your home is warm, it's not terribly windy, you're not getting gusts of winds coming through, hopefully. So they're in a really sheltered environment. Because of that, the transition to outside is going to be a transition, and it should be. It should take 2 to 3 weeks. And that is daily moving those seeds outdoors, starting with a couple of hours and working your way up to overnight. And of course, you want to check your weather. If it's going to be super cold, if it might dip into the below freezing, that day you're going to want to skip, of course. But you'll want to start bringing your plants out about 2 weeks before you're ready to plant them in the ground. That gives you plenty of time. You want to start outside in a sheltered area. I recommend filtered or shade for lighting in that area, someplace that doesn't get a lot of wind. If you put a young plant right in the sun first thing, they sunburn just like we do. And you'll see your leaves actually bleach out and turn white. That's a sunburn. And the plant can't recover from that. It could stress them out and kill the entire plant because they can no longer photosynthesize on that leaf because it's been damaged. Of course, bring them back inside before temperatures start to drop in the evenings. And each day you're going to add a little bit more time. So you might start with an hour, work your way up to 2 or 3 hours. Then you might do an afternoon. And you'll find an area in your yard that gets filtered light, has a sheltered. I use the side of my fence because I can tuck them up. I actually put them on top of my compost bin, and that way the fence is blocking the wind, and that particular area of my yard does not get direct sunlight. And so it's a nice place to get them out there, getting them used to the outside wind and the outside sun without shoving them out there and expecting them to just make it or break it, which is something you can do, but you're probably not going to have a lot of success. You'll notice by the end of 2 weeks, you're able to leave them out overnight, unless it freezes, of course. You aren't going to want to bring them in that case, or put a row cover over them. And that's one of the season extensions that I talked about that will be in next week's class on the cooperative extension site. So by the end of 2 weeks, you should have completely hardened off plants ready to go in the ground or wherever you're going to be planting them. It's a long process, and especially if you have a lot of starts, it will take a while each day to bring them out and bring them back in. You could put them on a cart. That way you can wheel them in and out. That makes it helpful if you have a lot of them. And it's definitely worth it because you'll be starting with healthy plants that aren't shocked. Because when you do shock them, it takes longer for them to recover and start growing again. And then you're going to have to wait even longer to harvest your crop. This is my information. My name is Gina Dion. I am the program assistant at the Anchorage Outreach Center. You can contact me. Phone right now is iffy because we're working remotely. So I will get your message, but it doesn't ring through to me. So please, if you do call me, leave me a message, or you can always email me. That's the fastest way to get in touch with me with any of your questions. If you think of something after you watch this, maybe watch it over, or you just see it for the first time and didn't have a chance to ask questions, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to help.
Great. Do we have any other questions there, John?
Can you fix leggy starts?
Can you fix leggy starts? That's actually a question I would like to know the answer to.
You won't be able to shrink them back down. They're always going to be a little bit long, but if you correct the lighting problem, your new growth should be fine. And hopefully that legginess, so let's go here. This is a year I decided to start flowers in these one-piece seed start trays, and I will never do that again. Some of them grew much faster than others. The lighting was impossible to manage. And as you can see, some of them really took off trying to get to that light. Since I'm going to be planting them here, a lot of that extra stem will be taken care of. But it's the growth after the true leaf that will be problematic. I ended up losing all of these because they couldn't hold themselves up. So you can definitely have an issue where you may need to start over, but if you catch it early, you can at least keep it from getting worse.
Yeah, I
This
think that's
happens
a
to
great,
be-
yeah, I think that's a great point is you try to avoid it. And then if you catch it early, you can maybe do something, but.
And that's a
they-
great way to, when you're checking on your plants to make sure the soil is moist, you can check on their growth and see if they're getting a little too tall, a little too fast. And you'll notice that they start leaning over even if there's not directional light because they're top heavy at that point. And I definitely recommend if you are doing this, keep a garden journal, write down what you're growing, when you started it and how it did. So that way next year you'll know whether you want to even bother with that particular variety or try something different. You don't have to try to remember what you did last year. A garden journal can be everything from a collection of photos on your phone with notes on them. It can be an actual journal. It can be a composition book, whatever works for you, but make sure you're writing down what you plant, not only how well it did, but if you had problems. But don't focus too much on the problems. You don't want to discourage yourself from doing it again. Make sure you write those successes down. Like, oh, my plant started to get a little leggy, so I lowered the light and it fixed it. That's a good thing to write in your journal to let you know, hey, I was able to solve this problem and my plants did really well. And now I have a reference point to go back to.
Super. So how we doing, John? Any other questions? No, you've done such a beautiful job of giving this explanation. We haven't had a lot of questions and that's always great. So.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
indeed.
glad I could help and thank you so much for inviting me. It was a blast. I had a good time.
Well, I always give the last word to the guests. So any last quips or favorite advice for people that are just thinking about trying to do this?
Start small. If you've never done this before, I grow about 100 starts for my garden, and I would not recommend that to most people, let alone people who are just starting. Get yourself a single tray, try a couple different varieties, and get that success under your belt and grow from there. Just like your plant, if you try to do it too quickly, too much at once, you're not going to be successful. And that's going to cause frustration. You might decide, I'll just forget it. So start small, just like your seeds, and give them lots of attention and love, and you'll do just great.
Well, I really want to thank you. I did learn some stuff today myself, so that's really cool. So I'm sure down the road, we'll be talking to you again.
Great.
Thanks and have such a great day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.